Remember earlier this year when Senator Mike Lee said this during a debate with independent candidate Evan McMullin?
There were rumors circulating suggesting that some states were considering switching out their slates of electors. If that were true, I would need to know about it. I did research on that. I made phone calls to figure out whether the rumors were true. The rumors were false.
Turns out Senator Lee wasn't telling the truth. In some newly released transcripts from the House January 6th committee, Cleta Mitchell, a top legal advisor to Donald Trump's campaign, says the plan to have legislatures in states won by Democrat Joe Biden in the 2020 election send alternate slates of electors to Congress on January 6th. Well, that plan came from Senator Mike Lee. And Lee said finding those alternate electors were the sweet spot in getting his Republican colleagues in Congress to go along. So the plan was to have electors for both Joe Biden and Donald Trump show up in Congress on January 6th. Having those competing electors meant lawmakers could possibly throw out the results from those states. If neither candidate got to 270 electoral votes, which is possible if some of those states won by Biden were thrown out of the total, then the election would go to the House, where Donald Trump would likely win and be kept in office for another term. So what these transcripts show is that in a December 7th text exchange, Mitchell tells Lee that the Senate is the court of last resort when it comes to certifying the election. Lee responds that the Senate's role in all of this would be triggered by the existence of a competing slate of electors. He follows up by saying, that seems to be the sweet spot for getting my colleagues to engage. Later in the transcript, Mitchell was asked about an email from conservative activist Tom Fitton, who brings up the alternate elector scheme. And here's where Mitchell puts a fine point on the whole scheme. She says, it wasn't my idea, it was actually Mike Lee's idea. Later in these transcripts, we learned that Mitchell asked Lee if he could convene a hearing of the Senate Judiciary Committee in order for her to air these allegations of voter fraud in Georgia. Remember, Mitchell was advising Trump and was on that phone call where Trump tried to pressure Georgia election officials to fine him 11,760 votes. We also learn that text messages back and forth between Lee and Mitchell. Lee references a January 6th strategy to have members of Congress reject electoral votes based on those claims of election fraud. And if you think about it, that's where a hearing by the Senate Judiciary Committee comes in, because if they had held that hearing, then Mitchell would have been able to make her claims of voter fraud in Georgia. Spoiler alert, there was no voter fraud in Georgia, but Mitchell would have had a platform to make those claims courtesy of Senator Lee, and then the information from that hearing could have been raised to certifying the electors from Georgia on January 6th. Ultimately, Lee did not go along with the plan to object to the election results. There were no alternate electors, and there were no public claims of voter fraud. No court had weighed in on that. But these text messages show it certainly wasn't for a lack of trying.